Microphone checking. Microphone checking. A little cool, huh? Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Okay, I appear to be live streaming with the microphones working. I'm here to say I'm either mad or glad, or both. Maybe you are too. Genexial, welcome. Your presence is always a delight, a wonder, a truth, and a glory. All those things and more. Oh, hello, Eli. Today, I'm experiencing two emotions, madness and gladness. I'm glad about a lot of things, you know. I just went to my favorite store, Gems Aplenty. I took Delilah on her first geode run. And the girls had a lot of fun. Rachel and Delilah had a lot of fun. And I enjoyed myself, of course, too. But it makes me especially happy when I see Rachel and Delilah being so happy, you know. Third slot FE, I guess. But, you know, I've been also feeling kind of mad about YouTube, maybe demoralized about it. I'm not sure. One of the two. Basically because I just have so much experience with so many people having so much more success than me, despite being wronger and etc., you know. Do you ever think ENTJs and ESTPs are superficially similar? Yeah, they get confused. No. There's nothing crazy about that at all. They often get confused for each other. In fact, Chad Crandall, a.k.a. Damon Gray, began by his MBTV channel by declaring himself ENTJ, and then later said he was an ESTP in socionics, which of course makes no sense at all, you know. The thing is that the labels ESTP and ENTJ represent specific things. ESTP represents SETI, and ENTJ represents TENI. So you can't be one and the other, and one, you know, it's ridiculous. I've noticed that the types that share the first and third letters tend to be very similar. So ETs, ESTPs, ENTJs, ENTPs, ESTJs. Yeah, we could kind of look alike. Yeah, that makes sense. It's because the third slot, second slot, sixth slot. I mean, it's first slot, third slot, eighth slot, sixth slot. So you're getting a lot of demonstrative NE, for example, in the ETs. But it looks very different in each one. Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad you're doing good. Rambunctious Sailorcraft 5940. I'm doing both mad and glad, is how I'm doing. I'm mad about some things, I'm glad about some things. And, yeah, I've been lying fallow here on YouTube for quite some time. I guess I got disillusioned, burned out, frustrated, upset. It didn't. It's not merely a coincidence with Sleepy Week. A lot of times I will continue to live stream during Sleepy Week, but I guess I've been feeling frustrated. When it comes to cognitive function stuff, I get frustrated because at least half of the people who come here to talk to me about it do so not intent on learning, but instead on either negating, correcting, teaching, or even figuring out together. The fact is, almost everybody who comes here and talks to me about functions really should come here with the intent to learn. Yeah, but see, the thing is, it's not the case that in socionics or in whatever, right? Extroverted sensing is a cognitive function that is best described as a process, meow, 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 meow. So if you're describing that process incorrectly, then you're wrong. It's not you have an alternate perspective, it's that you're wrong. So socionics is wrong to describe it as force. It only seems like forcefulness because intuitives came up with socionics. So there's nothing forceful inherently about extroverted sensing. It is decisive. It is pull the triggery. But the reason it seems forceful is because with ENTPs, like, the guy who came up with socionics, extroverted sensing is the end of the deliberation process. It's the end of the talking it out process. So that's going to seem like force if you're an intuitive. But to describe extroverted sensing as forcefulness is wrong. It's just plain wrong. And it's displaying a lack of awareness of self and a lack of one's own cognitive bias in trying to determine how to model things, No, I mean, here's the thing, Eli. It's not absolutist. It's relatively absolutist, which, you have two choices. You're always going to be absolute on one side or the other. You're either absolutely relative. In other words, what's absolute is what is concrete to me, or you're going to be relatively absolute. What's absolute is what's true or logically sound for everybody, Well, that's absolutely correct, Eli. That's the thing. Symbolic reasoning is not about being accurate with reality necessarily. So being objective does not mean being more correct, being more concrete, being more linked to reality, okay? The words subjective and objective can have different meanings, sure. But we have to mean something when we say them, or else we're not really communicating ideas, okay? So the problem I have is this. People want to say, well, why should we disagree with Jung's definition of why should we disagree with Jung's definition of TI? He says it's subjective. But he doesn't say what he means when he says subjective. So does he mean it's simply of the subject? If so, that's non-unique to TI. It's true of all cognitive functions. And these statements are indisputable, right? So it's because of the way I'm phrasing them, we can be absolute. Sure, it's just language, it's just symbolic, it's just representative, but our capacity to map the world has proven time and time again that symbolic reasoning is extraordinarily effective in engaging with reality, even though it's detached from it. So there's no disputing any of this, right? The theory of relativity better explains the universe than a geocentric understanding of the universe. Okay? That's not in dispute. Now, granted, it's only true within its frame of reference. So, in other words, on the Newtonian physics level, Newtonian physics is right. On the Einsteinian physics level, relativity is right. On the quantum physics level, quantum physics is right. So, obviously, it's not absolute in the sense that it's not universally applied, but it's absolute within its frame. And that's what reasoning is. It's absolute within its frame. So the problem with cognitive functions is people think that because reasoning is absolute within its frame, that any set of reasoning within any frame is equally valid as if you're only talking about reasoning. But that's not the case, as Einstein's theory of relativity proves, or as, for example, plate tectonics proves. we've got plenty of explanations of things that for which have long been many examples of things needing an explanation, have gotten multiple explanations until one of them proves correct. This is how it works, right? Are these concepts in conflict with one another? Well, see, that's the thing. Some of the concepts that socionics has are in conflict with an accurate representation of cognitive functions, and some are not. My ideas are never in conflict with an accurate representation of cognitive functions, primarily because I'm always qualifying what I say. In other words, I'm doing an excellent job consistently of parsing my claims so that everything I say can be justified and is contextually understood. If you're socionics, they've got a bunch of dichotomies. They don't make a distinction between which of those dichotomies is a process-oriented dichotomy, which of those dichotomies is a behavioral correlate, which of those dichotomies represents a probability versus an inherent part of the process. They don't draw those kind of distinctions because they don't argue well. And at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. Is, it's like Fate Wind tried to get me a debate with Modern Day Debate. It was very intent on getting me to participate in that. Well, it's been an interesting process. I haven't gotten really anywhere. It looked at first as though Fate Wind had scheduled a debate, but of course Fate Wind badly misrepresented my position to the guy. The guy wanted, Fate Wind was saying to the guy that I wanted to debate that people shouldn't take the vaccine, or that people, that COVID is fake or something. That's never been my position. It's like the inability of others to understand a nuanced position as being superior and why it's superior is extraordinarily frustrating. Now, of course, this guy from Modern Day Debate, he's a very smart guy. He's very sensible, and in fact, in his auto reply emails that I keep getting, he indicates that he's no longer considering including anybody who doesn't have debate experience, which is very smart, and which is something I've indicated before. People who don't have debate experience, who don't really know how to debate, the thing that they think they're doing that they're calling debate, that is not debate. They're not competent. The laity can't do it. And something like modeling cognitive functions is very much about making a debate case. So the thing is, the problem with psychology in general is there haven't been debaters in there saying, whoa, who's managing the framework and the meta framework here? Nobody is. And that's why psychology is a mess. The thing is, understanding all this is frustrating because I'm talking to a vast majority of the audience that doesn't have debate experience. So I'm basically telling everybody, you guys don't think well because you don't really understand how to engage argumentation meaningfully. And nobody wants to hear that. You don't want to be told that. You don't want to be told you don't think well. You, among everybody else that I encounter in the world, doesn't think well. Modern Day Debate guy thinks well enough to realize it's pointless trying to include non-debaters in debate, right? They don't know what the fuck they're doing. It's just a clusterfuck of disaster. It's like, imagine a bunch of people who all emerge into adulthood thinking they can play baseball, but none of them knowing the rules at all, right? And so they go, no, I get 6 swings and misses before I'm out. And you go, okay, that's a boat paddle, not a baseball bat. What are you doing? Right? It's pretty frustrating for people who actually know how to play baseball. The problem is debate comprises a meaningful component, supposedly, of the public discourse in general, something to which everybody should be party and is party. Unfortunately, almost nobody can meaningfully have a productive conversation about ideas without getting their egos involved. And a big part of the problem there is that I keep telling everybody I'm right. They're wrong. So everybody else is wrong. That's going to necessarily challenge everybody's egos. Unfortunately, it's the fucking truth. So what am I supposed to do about it? It's like Richard Feynman said, if I could explain it to you, it wouldn't have been worthy winning the Nobel Prize. So that's what I'm mad about. People think they want to be smart and they want to be the one pontificating about shit and coming up with ideas and blah, blah, blah. You don't. It's a fucking nightmare. It's an absolute fucking nightmare. Because you're dealing with a bunch of people who can't even speak the same language as you. No, I don't think good argumentation and counter-argumentation can happen only through debate. I think that people who aren't accustomed to... People who want to debate, okay? People who fancy themselves good at debating but have no debate experience are the worst possible debaters. People who are interested in discussing ideas and stuff and have plenty of questions to ask and stuff like that. You know, the worst debaters are people who make a series of unsubstantiated claims, shifting ground from place to place, not being willing to be pinned down on what exactly their position is, dissembling and bullshit, you know? Just sophistry at its best, and much less than that at its worst. That's what I encounter most of the time, right? For people who want to have conversations with me, it's great. No problem. When you ask a question like that, KE, you want to have a conversation. But do you think good argumentation and counter-argumentation can only happen through debate? You and I might, you and I might potentially have disagreed about that, except I agree with you that no, that's not the case. It's just the people who want to argue and don't have any experience. Those are the problems, right? Those are the problem people. People who don't want to argue, who aren't here to prove themselves righter than me, are not a problem. I'm perfectly happy to have conversations about things and to... Rachel, do you know if I brought my coffee in the car?
I don't know if you brought your coffee, but I have a feeling that you didn't.
Well, see, that's the thing, Boba Fett, is... Boba Fett asks, at what point does a conversation become a debate? A conversation... Ideally, these conversations wouldn't be debates. There's a lot of people who are interested in debates, quote-unquote. The debate between Jordan Peterson and Meow over whatever. Things like that. Those aren't debates. Those are staged disagreements or something. But a conversation becomes a debate when you have a clear resolution. One person is affirming and the other is negating. That's the answer to the question.
Would you like me to see?
Yeah, I wonder, could you possibly either get my coffee from the car, or if it's not there, could you get me a Perrier from the garage?
Uh-huh.
Thank you, darling. I appreciate it. The thing is, people come in here with the wrong idea about typology. And it's a lot of times, it's even TI users who think, listen, you and I are both the same thing, Eric. We're both armchair philosophers doing random thinking about this kind of open-ended topic. You can no more claim exclusive rightness here than an astrologer can claim exclusive rightness with astrology. But the thing is, they're trying to play both sides of the coin there, because we all are in agreement that we're talking about something that's much more substantial and meaningful than astrology. That there's a real linkage that can be explained. The difference between something that is like astrology, which is there's a mechanics to it but no explanation, and something like typology is the explanation. Why it's this way. And, the other thing is, you'd be able to simulate, if you get it correct, these processes, and presumably the behavior of the simulated beings, according to the rules you put in the processes as you define them, it's going to look like the stereotypical behavior of those types, by and large. The more perfect you get it, the more like the actual spread of population and how it behaves becomes. So, the thing is, modeling cognitive functions is going to be something like modeling a metaphysical ecosystem. In other words, making the internet. It hasn't always been the case that I could do this on the internet. At first, I couldn't do this. Thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it. It wasn't always the case that we could do this on the internet, right? It used to be that originally there was like a BBS. And that was it. But now there's all kinds of shit you can do on the internet. We stream almost all of the TV we watch, except for the Olympics, of course, which we watch on TV.
But even that you can stream. I saw an advertisement on YouTube saying that if you're interested in watching, you can watch it on YouTube somewhere.
Well, I still think that for live sporting events, streaming's not quite caught up to TV because I've got really good internet. I still get little lags and shit when I stream. Depends on the streamer too. Like ESPN's pretty iffy. Fox seems to be better. So, I don't like streaming live sports. Okay, so KE asked a question, but does that apply if you divorce the ability of people to properly type other people from the validity of the framework itself? I mean, well, it would suggest that if the model's correct, you'll increasingly be able to use the model to construct meaningful tests that'll tell you what type somebody is with a high degree of certainty. We have some of those tests in place now. I have a high degree of faith in my ability to identify, and for anybody to use this test and replicate the same results. If you do SI test ABC, percentage of the population will score like this, will answer like this. You know? So, in other words, with the TI polar questions, I can confidently say that a certain percentage of the population will answer those questions by either critiquing the black and white thinking in them, misunderstanding what you're asking entirely, not getting the idea of symbolic reasoning inherently, etc. And the answers will look like this. Who is my mother's sister in relation to me? Family? Or if only blah 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 and some blah blah blah, then blah 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 blah. Well, but it's not really true that only blah 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 blah. But if it were, but it's not really the case that's TI polar. So the thing is, I'm already confident that we've got a couple of these elements that link well enough to very difficult to game skills that they comprise as close as you're going to get to a replicatable, ungameable personality test. Keeping in mind that human beings are open systems. In other words, once you learn something, then that changes how you approach things. So, this has always been the challenge of psychology, right? Is to hide from the people being tested in any given psychology test what they're being tested for. So, let's look at the famous Milgram Experiment. In the Milgram Experiment, people we're not told what was really going on at all, but were directed by people in white coats and with clipboards and dressed like scientists to continue pressing shock buttons even as the person on the other end was screaming in agony. And a lot of people, most people, continue to press it all the way, sometimes all the way through to when the person stops saying anything and pretend as though they were dead. And this test was intended to evaluate fascist tendencies or something, right? But the thing is, as soon as I learned about the Milgram Experiment, it ceased to be possible to catch me with any variant of the Milgram Experiment. So, in other words, for whatever reason, I don't like getting fooled like that, and thereby revealing some deficit of mine. So you can be damn sure that I'm always going to challenge that sort of thing from now on. Even if I wouldn't have prior to learning about the experiment. So that's what it means to be an open system, okay? Now, we're not like animals in that regard. If I test, we're somewhat like some animals. For example, they did this experiment on crows. The guy this experimenter went out with a caveman mask on and caught some crows and just tagged them or whatever and then let them go. And then every time he went out again with this caveman mask on, all the crows would caw, caw, caw their danger, danger, danger call because they had learned that the guy with the mask was a crow catcher. And this continued even after all the crows who had been alive when the original crows had been caught were dead. So it carried on generationally, right? The thing is, that association, fool me once, don't fool me again, or whatever it is, is sort of built into being. We don't like this links back to the prime directive, which is trying to make your map and your territory match. So when these crows who normally went about their business totally unmolested, one day were caught by this man in a mask, it violated their map territory thing. They had not expected this. This was a new vector coming in that threw a loop into their whole worldview in some sense. So what did they do? They adapted to say, not that we can no longer safely be on the ground eating food, but that guy is the problem. Which is a much smarter conclusion to draw, right? So, if I wanted to do the same test on the crows now, and I went out with my caveman mask on, it wouldn't work. Because they'd be too scared of me, so let me catch them in the first place. I'd have to switch it up and do a new test, right? Well, most kind of psychology tests are like that. And what we're seeking in cognitive functions is something that's more robust than that. Namely, a skills kind of test that people cannot game. That they can't learn how to beat it. So, you can learn how to beat Milgram's test. All you have to do is hear about it once and remember, and you're not going to engage in that, right? You're not going to get caught by that trick. You can't learn to pass a well-administered, robust, multi-angled TI test and end up faking your slot very successfully. Unless you've got somebody in your earbud. You have to cheat. You have to directly cheat, And that's a lot stronger than most anything else in psychology, let alone cognitive functions. So that's what I'm saying. Now, the point is, everybody else who's saying that is agreeing with me. So the problem I have is people aren't approaching this from that kind of a meaningful kind of angle of analysis, right? How are we going to meaningfully make this distinct from a lot of other psychology things that are just bullshit? You got two ways to go. You could go pure empirics, like Big Five, but then the only thing you're linking to are after test correlates to test results. So all the test does is tell you how people score on this test tend to do in meow area or meow area. In that regard, it's somewhat predictive, but it's not explanatory at all. It doesn't explain personality at all. It doesn't even attempt to explain it. It just says people have it, and it expresses as these attributes that people don't really have, but that we convey onto people. It doesn't draw a distinction between really the inner life and the external life, the private life and the public life, which is weird because for introverts, the private life is the majority of their life. Given that you can replicate these TI responses, those kind of tests, if you're familiar with conditional logic rules and a contextual knowledge at the end of the testing, you can't. That's the weird thing, Kay. You can't. You can, an ESFP or an ENFP could learn that stuff hardcore, could study it hardcore, and they still wouldn't display. They might not display polar, but they definitely wouldn't display like first or second. It just it's a manner of how quickly they process. There's too many factors. In other words, it's a good raw test of actual talent. So you could get a room together and give everybody the same amount of instructions too, like the same amount of instruction ahead of time. Some people simply are not equipped to learn that kind of thing because it's a non-habituated attentional manner. And note this, SI. SI is a subjective knowledge function. So how does it play out as a subjective knowledge function? Well, one way that it does, and I don't usually use subjective and objective to talk about the knowledge functions, but it's appropriate for the epistemology functions, for both TI, FI, and SI and NI. One of the reasons it's a subjective knowledge function is it learns what it wants to learn. So I was with an ISFJ for 2.5 years, by the end of which she was still asking me what FE stood for, you know? I've been hanging out with Cameron for years now. He's still asking me what TE stands for, what type he is again. He forgets, you know? Why? Because they're not choosing to learn that stuff. NI is an objective learning function in the sense that NI can't help but knowing what's true, even when it's unpleasant. And that can be trouble for an NI dom, you know? It can mean sort of the INTJ rage. Everyone's doing everything wrong. It's true. Everyone's doing everything wrong. You know? Am I a language prescriptivist or descriptivist? I mean, there are different kinds of statements in English or in any language. There are descriptive statements, prescriptive statements, normative statements, and predictive statements. So what does that make me? I mean, it makes me somebody who's accurately describing language. Does that mean I'm a descriptivist? I mean, look, language serves multiple purposes, right? And in addition, for every language act, there's a locutionary act and there's an illocutionary act. There's to say the publicly stated part that can be objectively analyzed, and the illocutionary part, the reason why you're saying it, and or your secret hidden motivations, and or stuff maybe you don't even know about yourself that's influencing it. So that's how language works. Individuals use language for multiple purposes, and depending on the construction of the language, conveys the purpose of the language and or the category of the language. Questions are interrogative and seek specific pieces of information, usually, but they can be more or less open-ended. Sixth is closer to polar than fifth. I agree. I do a lot of things that that TE polar person might do. Knock stuff over, just do things in a dumb way. The difference between me and TE polar is like ignorance is bliss. It's like they don't really recognize their polar TE as being such a big problem. They just kind of, well, another thing does, I don't know how to figure this out. So anyway,
we really do need the sensors and as we,
yeah, we sure do need the sensors. I'm looking for a hat. Oh, messy.
See, there's definitely one under there. Yeah. Like,
Right. You see somebody like Oliver Linehan who chooses to learn cognitive functions, and he's all over it because it's what they practice. If you look at the way that schools teach language now, they use phonics. They used to use a system called whole language, which is better for intuitives and was made by intuitives because that's how intuitives learn language. In other words, we don't need to sound out words. We pick them up by reading. And we don't need to be taught we don't need phonics. Intuitives don't need phonics to learn how to read and speak. But sensors generally do. And so that's why we switched to phonics, because there's a lot more sensors than there are intuitives. And the intuitives finally said, okay, let's get results instead of teaching at the top of the class, What exactly determines what the status quo is in a debate? Is it simply general consensus, or something like which advocacy requires the least assumption? Well, in a formal debate, the resolution is structured so that the AF changes the status quo. So it's circular reasoning here, but it's adequate for the debate round, which is to say, we know that the AF changes the status quo, so whatever the AF is affirming must represent a change to the status quo. But okay, so the thing is, it's almost never an issue because in a debate resolution, they're written carefully. So if you have a resolution that says the United States should end all tax subsidies to oil and gas companies, which was a resolution a while back. Well, the reality is the U.S. has no tax subsidies for these companies. What they have are tax breaks. So in other words, there are loopholes, which typically are things like which were put there in the first place by politicians who are trying to encourage certain behavior. Well, if you invest this much in green energy, then you'll get this much of a tax break. And then the next group of congressmen come along and they say, I'm tired of the U.S. government subsidizing oil and gas companies. Well, that's not a subsidy by any meaningful definition of the word, except as a term of art, it's considered a tax subsidy. So, as a matter of fact, it would be changing the status quo to get rid of all those kind of loopholes. Of course, it would be a ridiculous idea because the reason those oil and gas companies have invested in blah, 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 blah is because the federal government directed them with their ridiculous tax policies to do so. How do pro-debates go about eliminating observer-judge biases? Well, okay, so at the top level of debates, first of all judges have to have a paradigm on tab room. And the paradigm basically says how you judge what you're biased against or in favor of. So, I put on my paradigm that I'm blank slate, but I would also say that I rarely vote for narratives or performance Ks or identity Ks. Certain kinds of Ks. I might put that there. You'd have to, but I'll vote for it if it wins the round. The thing is, what I'm really telling them is how much work does your opponent have to do to defeat your bullshit if you're bullshitting in this way. So if you want to do a bullshit race K, your opponent doesn't have to do a lot of work to get me to vote against you. But they still have to do some argumentational work. If they don't argue against it, I'll vote for the race K. When I say I rarely vote for performance Ks, what I'm saying is your opponent doesn't have to do a whole lot of work to defeat your performance K in my book because I see them as fundamentally non-topical. If they run a simple topicality block, you're done. And I will vote on topicality. So I put that in my paradigm too. Yes, I will vote on topicality. That's commonly put in paradigms because some judges don't vote on T and some judges do. And in debate, we just call it T. But so that's part of how you make sure you have judge bias. But then, in addition to that, they have what's called it's judge ranking. So every competitor before they go into the tournament ranks the judges, their first choice judge, second choice judge, all the way through all the judges. And what'll happen then is for every round, if you get your 45th favorite judge, then it's also your opponent's 45th favorite judge, approximately. So that's another way they deal with judge bias and stuff to get rid of it. Thirdly, most of the people who are judging at serious tournaments with TOC bids or national championships and stuff on the line, they're all experienced debaters, so they know what they're doing. But fourth of all, there's something called judge variance. So the judges who are most at the mean with all the other judges, so in other words, the ones who have the least variance from like let's say Joe's debated 6 LD rounds and has gotten in all those rounds they get speaker points, right? So let's say they've gotten 29 in 5 rounds and 25 in 1 round. Well, the person who gives 25 has got a big judge variance. They're not going to be allowed to judge in out rounds or in the elimination rounds. So that's another way to get rid of judge bias and stuff like that. Also, you're prohibited from judging anybody from your own school, anybody you've ever coached before, anybody you've ever been on a team before with, and you're supposed to disclose all that stuff ahead of time. And they also have records of whoever you coached with and stuff. So there's automatic eliminations. If judges are either deemed clean or dirty. You can only judge the same debater once in a tournament. After you've judged Joe in a tournament, you are now dirty for Joe. Like, that's the term. So you can't judge any round that Joe's in from that point forward. So there are a lot of stuff in place to make sure that things are judged fairly. And even so, it can be controversial sometimes. Additionally, and the later into the tournament you get in out rounds, they start to have panels instead of a single judge. Most final rounds of big tournaments have 5 judge panels. I was on a 5 judge panel at Nationals Public Forum, middle school Nationals Public Forum, and it was a 5-0 decision. I was happy I wasn't the squirrel, you know. That's what they call the one judge. If it's like a 4-1, the one is the squirrel judge. So that's how you handle shit professionally, right? That's how you debate professionally. That's how you make sure that shit's real. And it's like there's also you have to debate, you have to make all the right kinds of arguments. So, for example, when I had my kid in an elimination round against Harvard Westlake, it's like the tournament that we went to, it was for LD, it was to make elimination rounds. There were 6 Harvard Westlakes, 1 Marlboro School for Girls, which are the 2 fanciest private schools in all of LA County, and my kid, autonomy. So, and I only had 1 kid, right? And he was an 8th grader, and this was a high school tournament. So, anyway, he did make out rounds, and fucking Harvard Westlake guy ran a totally non-topical AF in the out rounds, and my kid said it was non-topical, but I hadn't taught him how to run a proper topicality shell, so he lost the round. All the judges said, all you need to do is run a proper topicality shell and you would have won the round, but I hadn't taught him that yet, and so we lost it, you know, and they surprised me. I got out-coached a bit. I had them prepped for what they were running in prelims, but they switched it up and ran their counter plan as a non-topical AF, and how the fuck am I supposed to anticipate that? Next time I'll know, though, for Harvard Westlake. Eric, do you think the primary purpose of incarceration is justice or keeping such people off the streets? Well, I think there are 3 distinct purposes for criminal incarceration. 1 is rehabilitation, 1 is retribution, and 1 is deterrence or public safety. So rehabilitation is the notion that somehow you're going to make them not behave badly in the future. Retribution is the notion that you're getting justice for somebody who's had wrong done against them. And deterrence is the idea that there's a general societal good from keeping dangerous people away from other people and deterring people from engaging in dangerous behavior. Of the three, retributive justice is the most logically valid, especially if it's restorative in some sense, which is not necessarily, but it can be. Rehabilitative justice is the most morally robust, I guess you'd say. And utilitarian justice is the most pragmatic. So depending on your cognitive function bias, you're going to prefer one angle of analysis on justice versus another. But those are the three kinds of justifications people use for criminal justice. When I'm in debate, I'm usually arguing that retributive justice is appropriate and should be bounded by proportionality. And that the argument should be about what comprises proportionality. And that rehabilitative justice is largely a justification for injustice. And that the pragmatic kind of justice probably has a lot less impact than people think. That's what I tend to think, you know. What flavor of justice do you like best? Justice is something we can be glad for instead of mad about. Am I in favor of the death penalty? No. I'm opposed to the death penalty. I don't think you can justify it. So I oppose it. The reason I don't think you can justify it is because what comprises justice is bounded by proportionality, not defined by it. So an eye for an eye is not necessarily just. I think that we are bounded by proportionality, which means we can never do more. We oughtn't harm the wrongdoer more than the wrongdoers harmed the victim. But that doesn't mean that we should always harm the wrongdoer exactly as much as they've harmed the victim. And a lot of the harm to a victim is harm that is it's hard to calculate. So being victimized has had a lot of impacts. My dad had an identity theft, and he didn't really lose anything. Okay, they managed to get like $3,000 worth of Apple stuff, which was fraudulently purchased. He didn't have to even pay for it, and then we managed to get everything locked down, and it ultimately probably served a good purpose of getting us to handle a bunch of identity stuff that's important to make sure, you know, especially when you got an elderly dad who's not very computer savvy. But it really fundamentally changed his attitude towards a lot of things in ways that make him a lot more fear driven than he would otherwise have been. Now that's a meaningful harm that's been done to him as a victim of a crime that didn't cost him anything, right? So those kind of things are difficult to factor in, and it makes equations of justice a little bit more complicated than simply a calculus of a rights violation and harms done, you know? And measurable harms done. The courts are notoriously dismissive of your feelings. And I think maybe too much so sometimes. I think typology has a role to do with the criminal justice system, of course. It's like, I typed this ISTJ the other day, and I said, let's say I'm proposing a law that requires everyone to wear hats on Wednesdays in order to reduce skin cancer rates. And before I could barely finish saying it, he's like, oh, I'm all in favor of it. So, what does that tell you? What does that have to do with criminal justice? Well, from this person's perspective, it's a purely pragmatic matter. Anything that's not pragmatically good for society ought to be criminalized, you know? That's his approach to it. And when I asked him a couple more questions, he realized, well, maybe that's a little, maybe I'm jumping the gun here. But his initial response is, of course, that sounds like a great idea. Reduce skin cancer rates. All I need to do is look at the outcome to determine whether or not it's a good idea. So ends justify means is deeply entrenched in such people, and they're going to understand their criminal justice system accordingly. Whereas for somebody like me or an INTP, we're going to understand the thing as being basically rights-based, that we have to put the onus where it's appropriate, that the onus should be on the individual to, like for example, the CDC is advocating or advising for mandatory masks for all people, including vaccinated Americans now, because of the Delta variant. So it's like that's clearly a pragmatic position on criminal justice, right? It's not rights-based at all, and it's not rehabilitation based or improvement based at all. It's purely based on the idea that anything that we can articulate that's bad to society and that we can prevent justifies mandating those things and or criminalizing not doing them. Well, I agree with you, Evelyn, that it shouldn't be factored into matters of guilt or innocence or that which can or can't be prosecuted. But I think perhaps it should play a more significant role in sentencing. So it's like mitigating factors do come up and play a role in sentencing, as well they should. That's where the pragmatism in criminal law should play a role, which is after the guilt or innocence has been decided, now how much mercy or lack thereof do we want to show? How much mercy improves justice overall and how much mercy detracts from justice in this given circumstance? That's when it gets articulated, is in the sentencing phase. So I think that that's where it's appropriate to be articulated, and I think that's where, for example, the emotional or psychological impacts of a crime on a victim may be underweighed in an impacts calculus. Eric, do you agree that TPE people tend to miscalculate cause and effects when dealing with too many variants? Like in social matters, they just pick out arbitrary stuff and read into it. Well, yeah, I mean, the whole thing about extroverted thinking is it's founded in the subjective. What are you trying to accomplish? Now, what impacts do you count? So if you're trying to accomplish saving lives and you're the CDC, and it's the only impact you're counting, then you go, well, let's not just make people wear masks, let's make people wear those undersea diving helmets with air bottles attached to them. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous, right? The problem is, if you use their reasoning, then anything and every kind of mandate is justified. Any and every kind of prohibition is justified. Why allow people to drive? Well, that's not that much that's much more of an inconvenience than wearing a mask. Well, remember, for like a year, they locked us all in our houses. That was more of an inconvenience than not being able to drive. It's a very short memory, right? Of course, I was saying all this from the get-go. This wasn't going to work. Can I look at your question above? I know it won't be the last variant. This is the coronavirus. This is why they've never been able to vaccinate for it before successfully. Eric, do you think it is universally the case that an economic utility-based justification for a law only if it doesn't compromise the fairness of the law, no matter how beneficial the law can be? No, I don't think it's universal. In other words, I don't believe in totalizing any dogma, including that one. I think there are exceptions, you know. But I think they're far and few between. I think there are very, very many fewer exceptions than people want to acknowledge. it's interesting to see people finally come around on the drug war without coming around on the central issue, but underneath it. It's like the problem with TE thinking people is they have this ability to ignore what lessons there are to learn. The reason the drug war was a failure is because it inappropriately seizes the autonomy of the individual regarding the individual's owned body, and self. It's not appropriate to criminalize what people do to themselves. You might say that it has ancillary bad effects, but if those ancillary bad effects are criminal, criminalize those then. You don't need to criminalize the purported cause of it. But people haven't learned that lesson at all. The lesson that they've learned is that the drug war doesn't work. Which is true, but they haven't learned why it doesn't work. Or that we can generalize from that a need for an integrity of system. Now, just because it's generalized doesn't mean it's totalized. It's not. There will be exceptions. Language is not capable of totalizing in that fashion without encouraging totalitarianism. All individuals need to retain a knowledge that their symbolic maps and such are those. They are in fact symbolic maps. They're not things worth fighting and dying over. Ideologies are an absolute fucking nightmare, obviously. And it doesn't matter what form the ideology takes. As soon as you start getting super rights-based and say everything has to be filtered through that frame of reference, well, no, it's the world is more complicated than just TI. Some things aren't, though, in isolation, but the world in general is. And when you're talking about politics and what ought a society do in terms of rule of law and stuff, it's more complicated than any single set of rules can definitively function as a frame for. So a rights-based framework is a good starting spot to recognize which kinds of behaviors the government really ought not be engaging in. However, it's nevertheless the case that let's look at China and their opium wars. They had this massive population of people who were addicted to opium. And what did they do? Well, they conscripted them all into the military and put them on the front lines to get killed by enemy soldiers in a war. Was that the right thing to do? Well, no. But they also had a serious problem. They had a bunch of opium addicts who were just lying around smoking opium all the time. It was a problem that was becoming, a big deal. So the idea that society should do nothing about something like that is probably an anarchist pipe dream, I think that ultimately the answer is as simple as this. Keep people educated with honest education about the risks of certain kinds of drugs, especially those that are genuinely addictive, like opiates and stuff like that. And be honest in general about drugs as well. And say that, there are lots of people that almost everybody has some kind of drug. Whether it's an actual drug or something like shopping or controlling everyone in your family. There are lots of bad ways that people overdo in some sense or indulge in some sense. Drugs can be among the least harmful of those, as all the wonderful beer and wine and liquor commercials tell us, right? Of course, of all the drugs, by far the most dangerous in terms of societal concerns is alcohol. It's not certainly not marijuana. So, it's like when we don't use TI at all, we run into these ridiculous situations where contradictions don't matter. Like, well, why is it that alcohol is legal but not marijuana? there should be, if you're going to justify it with outcomes, then you should point to the fact that marijuana has much worse outcomes, but nobody could ever do that. Eventually, the logical arguments start to win, right? Eventually, people go, well, there is no reason for this. But it takes a long time because people are stupid as fuck, to put it bluntly. People are stupid as fuck.
There's this, you know the episode Pickle Rick where they go to the psychologist to have a family meeting? Well, one of the reasons they go to the meeting is because I think Summer was doing either whippets or she was huffing something, and when the therapist gets Summer to talk about it, Summer says, I just like getting high. Like, there's no other, like, deeper thing about it, like...
Right, and have you ever heard that really as in any talk about addiction or whatever, what it actually is? There's all these explanations for addiction. What is it actually? Oh, those people really like getting loaded. That's what it is, right? Yeah. That's what it's always been for me. I never understood in these Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, these people saying like, well, I need it, I was killing my feelings. I was self-medicating. I mean, I guess I was self-medicating if being sober was a disease, you know? It's like I always wanted to do drugs because life's too slow. Not because of any other reason. Not because I was sad. In fact, when I was sad, I don't like to do any kind of intoxicants. I don't understand why there's a right against self-incrimination. Well, it's not so much a right against self-incrimination as it is a right to remain silent. So the right against self-incrimination means they can't force you to say words. And that's part of the freedom of conscience. The right to believe and hold your beliefs and keep them to yourselves if you wish. And to not answer any questions of the police is because they have the burden to prove that you're guilty. It's predicated on the notion that it is more just to let the guilty free than to imprison the innocent. And it's systemically necessary. If you can force them to talk, how are you going to force them? You know? The only way to force people to talk is to torture them. That's what it's against. It's saying you can't torture people. You can't torture people into false confessions. The funny thing is, there's not a right to remain silent about other people's crimes. So, there have been instances where, and this is why there's been this argument in favor or against a shield law. There have been instances where journalists have been in prison because they refused to reveal information that the cops need to find a criminal. They subpoena the reporter, and the reporter says, I'm not going to reveal my source. And the judge puts him in jail until the reporter says, okay, fine, I'll reveal the source. So there is no right to not answer questions about other people's crimes. Interestingly. And that includes if you're a journalist who is protecting a confidential source. Now, there are certain sources who do have the right to not talk. There's a spousal exemption, so they can't require your spouse to answer questions about you. And I believe it's true of, used to be true of priests. I'm not sure if it still is. I think spiritual advisors still have an exemption as well. They can't be forced to answer questions. It's something that gets abused in Law and Order episodes periodically. I remember at least one Law and Order episode where the guy said he didn't have to answer any questions about this murder at an abortion clinic because he was the guy's spiritual advisor.
Really?
Yeah. My penis is my spiritual advisor. It can't be forced to answer any questions against me. Rachel told me a really interesting fact today. Nurses apparently say that when a man or a woman wakes up from being unconscious in the hospital, like maybe they've had, maybe they've been in a coma, or maybe they've had an arrest, died briefly, or whatever, but they wake up and they're like, ah, that women tend to always ask about their family, but men check to make sure their junk's still there. I believe it. I believe it. That's the first thing that I would do. Wait. Okay. Now, how are those people? What are they called? Family members. Interesting, huh? Yeah, but you don't have to testify at all. So, in a lot of criminal cases, the defendant doesn't testify. It's whether or not the defense attorney thinks the defendant is going to help himself or hurt himself by testifying. Once the defendant chooses to testify, however, there's a limit to which they can invoke the fifth. So, like, if the prosecutor calls up the defendant doesn't have to answer any questions. And so usually, yes, you should read this thing I have called, that I made called Advanced Argumentational Mechanics for Intelligent Adults or something like that. I made it specifically for you, Jebediah. Not really just for you, but for people like you. Okay, so I'll share this. Share and share alike. Everybody likes to share. Share and share alike. Everybody likes some hair. Share and share alike. Everybody wants some fare. So share and share and share and share and share and share and care. Pew. So the thing is, if you read that thing right there, you will be able to. Eucalyptus Koala says, Eric, I am in a frustrating situation. My TI is good enough to see all the inconsistencies in the TI people's assumptions around me, but at the same time, it's not good enough to argue against them. If you read that document right there, you will, hi RDL, here at the Olive Garden, your family. If you read that document there, you'll probably have a lot of questions. But if you ask me those questions, I'd be happy to answer them. It's an outline that it explains some things, but not everything. Let me pull it up here. Window capture. Window capture 3. There we go. Welcome to window capture 3. It's an exciting window capture that we can all enjoy. Now, the thing about this stuff is, it is, after all, like academic stuff. You know, it's people want debate to be fun, but there's a learning curve. And so, you start by what are kinds of sentences and what they do. There are statements, which are descriptive, prescriptive, normative, or predictive. There are questions, which elicit statements. And there are commands, which elicit action. What argumentation is and does. Arguments are statements about matters in dispute. Right? So, if a matter is not in dispute, there's no argument. A matter in dispute is usually a statement. Agreement comprises one way to resolve a status in dispute. Argumentational victory is another. Argumentation is almost always manifest conditionally. We almost never argue about what is. Instead, we argue about what we ought to do or say given what is. Disagreements about what is often comprise parts of arguments over what ought to be. Truth, proof, validity, and soundness. Truth. A. Truth is the status afforded to statements. Every statement has a truth value. Nothing but statements have truth value. Value can be true, false, or no truth value. Arguments comprise multiple statements. Multiple statements express truth via connectives. Statement connectives include and, or, if, then, and not. For example, if I say Kim and Eric ate at Denny's last night, I'm making two claims. Eric ate at Denny's last night and Kim ate at Denny's last night. E and K. For proposition E and K, a value of true requires both that E be true and K be true. If the example had used or, then it would have the value according determinedly. Either A or K or both needs to be true for the proposition E or K to be true. To establish and substantiate a claim is to earn the right to argumentationally operate as though the claim were true. This remains so until and unless the substantiated rebuttal is established and thus switches the status of the formerly true for the purposes of debate claim back to unsubstantiated or in dispute. So if we think about it like this, the debate becomes quite mechanical, right? In this regard, the quality of the arguments aren't really considered at all, except that's revealed in how easy it is to rebut them. Well, the thing is, there's strategies of rebuttal that I cover in here, and as I go down. There's different ways to rebut. So what Evelyn says is, use the same logic they are using to justify something horrible. Right. But by that logic, we could blah, 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 is a very natural and compelling TI argument. It doesn't seem to work very well in the real world when talking to people, right? We go, but we aren't using that logic to justify that. They don't believe that reasoning sets precedent. So validity equals deductively, valid equals deductively legitimate. An argument can be composed of nothing but true premises and a true conclusion and still be invalid. Soundness refers to arguments that are both true and valid. Arguments can be deemed unsound for any number of shortcomings, even when they largely withstand rhetorical scrutiny on their merits in most contexts. Debate versus street arguing. There is no difference. Street argument is just debate by incompetence. 6. Burdens. AF has the burden to affirm. AF simply refers to the party making the claim in dispute, the claim that is being argued about, the claim that is making a change to the status quo, in other words. The status quo is a place where both people agree. The person making the claim always has the burden to substantiate it. If the claimant fails to meet that burden and the claim is in dispute, then we ought not behave as though the claim were true. Reciprocal burdens refers to the stickiness of arguments. In other words, if I say that we can't do X because of environmental damage, then if you prove my advocacy Y causes more environmental damage than X, then you successfully negated my advocacy. However, if I say no to X because of economic harms, then pointing out that Y causes fewer environmental damages has impact on the debate, but does not necessarily negate the resolution. Reciprocal burdens is how people hold each other communicatively accountable. Elements of an argument. Claims. Assert a link between object X and impact Y. Warrants explain why we ought to accept as true for the purposes of the argument, the link, and therefore the impact claimed. Impacts are usually predicted as outcomes of an advocacy predictive claims. Predicted impacts are usually in lives saved, sanctity of life, dollars are gained or lost, general utility and agency, and liberty preserved, quality of life. principlist normative claims typically impact more abstractly. Liberty preserved or system integrity preserved are less concrete in benefits and harms, and therefore harder to win arguments with. And that's part of the problem. It's more correct, but I mean, the thing is, if people say to me that's not a valid analogy, I say, well, what part of it's not valid? Makes perfectly good sense to me.
That's a really good question.
They usually don't have any answer to that. So if you don't know what part of it's valid or why it's invalid, then you don't know that it's invalid, and we can put that aside. Now, if they have a reason, it's like, while it's true that analogies invariably break down at some point because they are analogous, not identical, that doesn't make them invalid in the point that's made. And the point being made here is, see, an analogy is typically a way of doing what Evelyn is saying, right? Like, well, by your reasoning, blah, 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 blah. So, a famous effective use of analogy was by Obama in that debate against, I don't remember who he was up against, but they said something like, right now the U.S. has lower levels of destroyers and battleships than we've ever had before. And Obama said, we also have fewer horse cavalry and muskets, but I don't see that being a problem. That was a very effective use of analogy, right? Because he's pointing out that just because we have fewer of something doesn't mean we're worse off. We have fewer buggy whips. That doesn't mean we're less effective in transportation, right? And so that's a legitimate analogy because it's critiquing the faulty assumption behind the claim of the other person. That having less of something than we used to means that we're worse off. Levels of argumentation. There's meta framework. We should affirm or negate for reasons unrelated to the locutionary content of the assertion made by the resolution. Framework. We should affirm or negate for reasons related to definitional limits established in arguments about what the topic means. Contention level. We should affirm or negate for specific reasons under one or both of the frameworks, which define criteria for legitimation under each to advocacy or negation. In other words, calculating impacts under each framework. So usually this is the way that well, not necessarily usually, but yeah, maybe usually, this is where debates break down to. They have contention level arguments. So AF is arguing we should do meow because it is going to have these positive impacts, and they're arguing this under a cost-benefit analysis, and Neg is saying no, we shouldn't do this because it's going to have negative impacts to rights, and they're arguing under a deontological framework, and then they're each arguing as well that they win under the opponent's framework. I win under my deontological framework because I best protect rights, but I also actually have the best total impacts because protecting the integrity of the system long term has better impacts than prioritizing short-term impacts at the expense of the integrity of the system. So you should vote for me under his framework or under my framework. And then the other guy will say, I actually protect rights better because a more prosperous society allows for more autonomy and more rights. And rights aren't meaningful unless they're able to be exercised. And so you should vote for me under his framework too. They're both making those arguments. Now the judge is going to pick one of the frameworks as winning the prefer my framework arguments. They're also going to have made arguments to say, however, even though I'm winning under both frameworks, prefer my framework because it's better because blah, 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 blah. So the judge is going to vote for one of the frameworks. I vote for the deontological framework. But they may think that the other guy actually affirmed under your deontological framework better than you negated under your own deontological framework, and they may still vote AF. So just winning framework doesn't mean you're going to win the round. Now, usually it does, because usually your case is structured so that it wins under your own framework. Meta framework then would be... Well, one simple way to think of meta framework would be saying his framework's unfair. vote for me because his framework's unfair and it's abusive. So let's say my framework is we should vote for whichever debater's name rhymes with Eric Strauss. Rhymes with Barack Baus. Okay, let's say that's my framework. Well, the opponent would say, vote against him even if he wins under my framework because his framework's so ridiculous and abusive that he deserves to be punished for it. That would be a meta framework argument, okay? And then we have here manners of substantiation or kinds of warrants. So these are different ways to substantiate a claim. It depends on the kind of claim. Descriptive and predictive claims, for example, utilize different means of substantiation. Descriptive claims can be established via evidence. Evidence can be data from studies, news reports of events, citations of expert analysis. Generally, simple descriptive claims don't stay in dispute long because evidence is concrete and determinate. Whether the truth of a descriptive claim matters depends on the magnitude of the described impacts established. Predictive claims rely on accurate approximations of system dynamics and so can only be established relative strength via probability. To be considered true for the purposes of debate, a predictive claim needs to be warranted as more likely than any given alternative. And there's additionally we have to consider magnitude. So normative claims. Normative claims concern ethics, morality, or legitimacy attained through means other than self-interest. They deal in universals and evaluate prospective decisions by removing particularist concerns specific to individuals and replacing them with instances that can be processed via general rules. Normative claims are established usually by comparison against a standard or normative adjudicatory mechanism such as deontology, negative rights, or obligatory altruism, etc. Arguments over normative claims, then, are more likely than not to collapse to an argument over which normative system is preferable. After all, if both parties use the same test key, then there wouldn't be a normative claim in dispute in the first place. Mechanism arguments explain how a force vector within the system impacts how a given advocacy affects the environment of the system rather than how it generates impacts within the environment of the system. Normative impacts often rely on the need to maintain system integrity and thus often turn to mechanism arguments to attain predicted outcomes. Predicted impacts. If we bomb ISIS, they will be less trouble. We can negate such claims by attacking the link, showing why the action won't produce the claim outcome, by turning the link, showing why it will produce the opposite outcome, by turning the impact, by showing why a less troublesome ISIS is bad, by establishing disadvantages, by showing how other impacts not predicted by the claimant will also happen, be bad, good, outweigh the impacts, by arguing framework or meta-framework, or by establishing a mutually exclusive counter-advocacy that withstands scrutiny. In other words, perming. Well, I mean, not perming, but making a non-permeable counter-advocacy. A non-permeable counter-advocacy. So this here, it's like these are all the possible ways in which you can negate a predicted impacts claim. That's it. There's 6. Every possible thing you could possibly say falls into one of those categories. Does it matter to know that? Yeah, it does, right? It's kind of important to know that. It's pretty damn important.
Can I ask you my question?
Sure.
Would TI Polar have a hard time in debate?
Yes. Well, ENFPs do a better job than ESFPs by miles. ESFPs it's absolute torture for them. ENFPs can be okay at it. They're better at affirming than they are at negating, and they like to have a stout, well-understood case. They need to be well prepped. They debate with TE. So, in other words, they've got to have the answers lined up for everything already. They can recognize things and then pull out the appropriate card, so they don't have to actually do any TI on the fly. They can be okay. But, not great. So then, this whole section here about like kinds of arguments, right? Manners of substantiation or kinds of warrants is really the meat and potatoes of debate. A lot of it. Appeals to principle and standard. Establish the specifics of the standard. So you need to say like, okay, well, the standard is rights means that it's that control emerged from ownership, basically. Establish why the standard ought to be the preferred one for the purposes of the debate. Establish that your advocacy or negation is consistent with the standard you've delineated, at least more so than that of your opponent. Such argumentation relies primarily on reasoning, logical consistency built from consensus intuitive truths regarding morality. In other words, if your normative system produces a moral status of acceptable regarding the claim it's good to randomly maim toddlers with circular saws, then your normative system does not withstand scrutiny simply because it evaluates some actions in ways that contradict near universal consensus regarding the ethics of those actions. So in other words, at the bottom level, all normative argumentation is rooted in our intuitive agreement that randomly maiming toddlers with circular saws counts as morally prohibited. If we didn't have an intuitive moral agreement about things like that, which stems basically from either just our revulsion to the notion or logically it stems from ownership of your own body, right? But that's not why most people would say it's wrong. Flow pacting arguments. Arguments having only to do with how things established in the course of the argumentation that's already occurred on the flow related to other objects established on the flow are flow pacting arguments. Objects on the flow include the resolution, which is a single static object on the flow that is established by neither party but that is affirmed by the AF. Framework objects are definitions, observations, and criteria. Definitions are definitions. Criteria are explanations to the judge of how he should judge the round. Like, I should win if I prove meow. Observations are things that you expect all parties should be in agreement about without you having to establish them. Things like the sun sets in the west. Contention level warrants are justifications that hold up impact. So this is where your argumentation happens. And contention level impacts are matters to be weighed against one another in determining the winner of a given argument chain. So for an impact to count, the link has to be standing, right? The link is another word for warrant. Warrant and link are basically synonymous. Link is like the flow expression of a warrant. A warrant links things on the flow. Mantles are tags regarding the status of objects on the flow. The second subpoint under contention 2 is not standing because they dropped my corruption rebuttal warrant. So that would be, not standing would be then the mantle on that. In other words, it shouldn't be counted by the judge. Flow pacting impacts how mantles interrelate, matters to be weighed against one another in determining the statuses of objects on the flow, and voters, standing arguments positioned as round decisive. So it doesn't matter how many impacts my opponent established, because he called me a dumbass cracker, I should win the round. That would be a voter. Or since I'm the only one who has terminal impacts, in other words, my case says that if we affirm, we get global nuclear war, and his case says if we affirm, we get greater prosperity. But global nuclear war outweighs greater prosperity, so even if we're both right, I win, so vote for me. That's a voter, like saying you got terminal impacts. Contradiction. Pointing out a contradiction requires one of the following provided it's called out correctly. Your opponent must kick one of the contradictory claims. In other words, your opponent has to say, okay, well, I agree that I'm no longer arguing. Okay, you caught me. I was arguing A and not A. I'm no longer arguing not A. That's kicking one of them. You must explain how the presentation of contradictory premises invalidates both claims. So, in other words, if you not only point out the contradiction, but say that you can also say that don't let him kick one of them and validate both of them. You must explain which of the two you wish to address and then address it. You must make theory arguments as to why you now get to choose which of the arguments your opponent is actually making. So you can make the argument you choose which one, since he's making contradictory arguments. Or D, you can utilize reciprocal burdens to establish your own contradictory claims, impact them, and then demand the opponent and judge accept all impacts from both sets of contradictory claims or none from either. So these are all the possible strategies that you can take when you've caught somebody in a contradiction. And it depends how hardcore. If you can just tell your opponent to kick one of them, which means it's not really that significant to you. You just won't let them have both. Or you could try to make it a voter. So like that's the last one. Basically, it's trying to make it a voter. The second one is saying kick both of his arguments. The third one is saying I'm choosing which one he's making. He's making this one, and here are my arguments against it. And then you have to make theory arguments to why you're allowed to do that. Then there's double binds. A debater double binds himself when he claims that X is necessary for Y, and also that Y must be present in order for X to manifest. Example, South Korea should deploy THAAD. South Korea needs to improve relations with North Korea. South Korea can do so by getting rid of THAAD, because THAAD worsens relations with North Korea, but in order to better relations by getting rid of THAAD, they need to first have THAAD. So, this is an argument that I actually ran into by another coach. Ran this shit. That yes, South Korea should deploy THAAD because getting rid of THAAD will make North Korea happy.
Eucalyptus Qual says Eric's face reaction to Rachel's coughing is a mix of annoyance and tolerance. I'm sorry.
It's okay, baby. It is that indeed. It's annoyance and tolerance.
Ugh, it's so bad.
Turn. Most powerful form of argumentation. The ideal begins by quoting words your opponent has said. And then you say, this actually helps my side, and blah, 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 blah. Impact under frameworks. It's to make arguments that say, well, this means I win under my framework at least, or under his framework at least, or prefer my framework, which is like, prefer mine over his. And there's all these scuttling techniques, which is just basically what you call like freaking dissembling. You know, dissembling nibs. Nibs are necessary but insufficient burdens. It's like, oh, well, you can't make your argument until first you prove you exist. Right? Or, no, you can't win because you're being too vague, even though you're not being vague. Time skews. Like bullshit arguments that try to have you waste your time on little meaningless points and stuff, or else they'll try to claim you dropped it and it's decisive. Discursive critiques. We need to stop listening to what you said because you used the word lame when describing my second subpoint. You said it was lame, but that's ableist, so you should lose the round. I'm running an ableism critique now. That I would call that a dissembling technique. Plans, counterplans, perms, Ks, and alts. I mean, I'm not going to go over all this shit. I've spent plenty of time going over it. There's a lot of stuff there, right? It's the thing is, I like showing that. I appreciate those of you who are still here after me showing some of this, because it gives people the sense that, oh, it really is both complicated and learnable. You know? It's like if you're out there and you're one of those people who is coming in with your TI polar and shit and just trying to argue with me because you don't like the fact that I'm claiming that I'm right, read that and understand it. If you can't, then at least maybe that process will cause you to respect the fact that I've got some skills and knowledge and stuff. That I'm not just talking out my ass. If I was arguing with someone and they said, you lose until you can prove you exist, I would deck them.
It's such an ISFJ thing to say.
That's fantastic. There, is that enough proof for you? How about a knuckle sandwich, buddy? Does that prove you exist? The thing is, Artie, I don't really still have the juice for it. I wish Jeffrey was debating this upcoming year. He may debate some. I don't know. I don't really have the juice for it anymore. I guess I never really realized how frustrating it is talking about to meaningfully try to affirm a set of ideas in a non-debate world, because you know and the thing is, of course, the people who are least qualified to understand are the ones who are most confident that they understand so much and are ready to come in and meow me.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I'm glad it was helpful. Eucalyptus koala. It gets a little bit more complicated as it continues. It gets into perms and Ks and stuff. But basically, it's a lot of debate jargon that means some at the base of it pretty basic things. So, like a perm, to perm in debate is to permute. It's short for the word permute, and what it means is do both. So if I'm affirming that we spend $1 billion on school lunches, and you do a counter plan that says, no, we should spend $1 billion on school breakfasts, I can say, perm, do both. If you want to avoid that, then and the thing is, the reason you can say that is because to be a counter plan that successfully negates, K equals critic. In debate, critique is spelled like that, Kritik. It's a debate. It's a debate specific way of spelling it. I think it might be the German way of spelling it or something, but I think it's mostly done that way so we can distinguish between critiques and Ks, because you might read somebody's critique of, might read Kant's critique of pure reason or something, but you're not running a K. So anyway, to have a counterplan that actually negates an affirmation, the thing is, the idea of a debate is that the affirmation, if it wins, then the AF is done. The AF plan is done. It's pretended like it's legislation, right? So the status quo is changed upon the judge voting AF, is the pretend thing there. So if I'm going to perm and do both, then what I'm saying is, okay, well, we'll just add this to the bill then, okay? But if the neg wants to have a counterplan that successfully negates, it has to be exclusive. So, for example, there were a lot of counterplans on the nuclear weapons topic, because the AF had to affirm that just nations will eliminate their nuclear arsenals, and people would run eliminate nuclear arsenals except for submarine-based nuclear missiles, because of this particular strategic advantage or something. Of course, those counterplans didn't end up actually working very well, but they were exclusive of the resolution. You can't eliminate all nuclear arsenals while retaining some of them. So in other words, you couldn't perm that. You couldn't do both. You couldn't both retain some and affirm the resolution still. So all the neg had to do was say, we shouldn't affirm this resolution, because even though we're going to do nothing by negating, we don't affirm the counterplan, we just negate the affirmation, we preserve the status quo so that we can do the counterplan later if we wanted to. That's the argument, right? Because only the AF has the capacity to get anything done. If the AF wins, then the AF plan is affirmed and gets done, presumably. But if the neg wins, then the status quo is retained. No matter what counterplan the neg may run, they're not the AF, so they can't affirm anything. Right, so the thing is, eucalyptus koala, in debate, they're called critiques, but they're almost always called Ks, because you might use the word critique in another context. That's why. And there's a lot of different. There's stock Ks, you know. So people will run a cap K. People used to run cap Ks a lot, which are capitalism critiques that said basically we should negate because your affirmation helps capitalism, and capitalism is bad. But you know, people don't really run cap Ks anymore because they kept getting caught with basic shit like, so where'd you get your laptop? So you got to really debate like a caveman if you want to run a cap K. What's a topicality shell? Well, no, Legends Fall, I would not say there's a lack of creativity in formal debate. Not at all. It's you see all kinds of crazy shit. I've run all kinds of crazy shit. But let me answer the question about what a topicality shell is. So the shell has to identify the violation, the standard, and then why it's a voter. So it's got to say, you have to say, okay, the word, in other words, a topicality violation has to violate one of the words in the resolution. So people will sometimes run multiple T arguments. They'll say T, like he should have run topicality on eliminate. That eliminate means the elimination of all of the nuclear weapons and not the preservation of any of them. And because he's trying to preserve some in his counterplan, it's non-topical. The standard is would be either like dictionary definition or term of art. Either one, he could run both in that instance because he would be correct under both instances. And the violation is that it contradicts that standard. The theory then he'd run would be a theory arguments that say why it is that topicality is a voter. In other words, that the judge has to vote. There's some sort of stock arguments there that people typically run, stock theory arguments, which are more or less analytics. And you could run 4 or 5 of them in different warrants as to why it's a voter. So once you can establish that it's non-topical by word, and you can establish it's non-topical on a given word against more than one standard, 2 different standards potentially. There's also the theory standard, which is fairness or education. So you're gonna say the reason it's a voter is on the standard of fairness or education. Again, you could try to do both. Like some people might say, well, this may be non-topical, but it's more educational, so screw fairness, and ultimately it's in all of our best interests to learn about this non-topical shit. That wouldn't have worked in that instance because it was just their counterplan. It wasn't any new information, right? It was just the same counterplan they've been running all tournament, except they were running as the AF plan now. So that argument wouldn't have worked for them in that instance. But that's the topicality shell. Is you got to run the standard, the violation, in terms of the word, and the standard and violation. And then the theory standard that they violated to establish the impacts, and the alt. And the alt is always for topicality. They could have used a real definition of the word. The alt's always the same for topicality. Voters. Metaframe arguments about why you want. No, voters are saying this specific argument wins the round either because it stacks up the most impacts, more impacts than all the other arguments combined, or because it's a binary decisive thing. Like if you're running a topicality critique, you're saying this is a voter. You should vote on me. You should vote for me because his AF is not topical. I don't need to negate that his AF's a bad idea. I don't need to say that his AF had this ads or whatever, or try to turn his arguments or rebut them at all because he's not affirming this resolution. Since he's not affirming this resolution, he's negating it. And that means I don't have to do anything to win this round except point out that he's on my side. He's negating this resolution. He's saying we should not eliminate all nuclear weapons. We should retain some of them. Yeah, it was a lot of it was a lot of fun. Off topic, but you make one video on the best polar test for each function and another on how any users read NI users? Best polar test for each function. I don't have really good polar tests for all of them. The thing is, it's not a single question either. It's sort of a battery. So there's kind of a battery of TI questions and a battery of SI questions and a battery of NE questions that comprise the polar test for those three functions. Now, I'm tempted to think right now, this is brand new for me, but it may turn out to be quite reliable. I'm not sure. But getting people to display saying the same sentence in a straightforward way and then in a sarcastic way, I think maybe reveals FE polar. I'm not sure FE polar can really do that. So, if you say, okay, can you say, hey, I really like your hat in a honest complimentary way and then in a sarcastic way? The FE polar people go, hey, I really like your hat. Hey, I really like your hat. I go, no.
I really like your hat.
Oh, hey, I really like your hat. Oh, hey, I really like your hat.
You can just see the question mark right after that statement.
It looks like a moose died on your head. As far as how any users read NI users, it's so strange because I don't feel like I actively do a lot of reading, and yet I feel as though I'm very cognizant of Rachel's mood, what she's attending to in general anyway.
How's my mood?
You seem happy.
Oh, okay, good. Because that's how I feel. I was gonna say, if that's not showing, I don't know what I'm feeling then.
No, I just I feel like I'm like well, I can tell when Rachel's altering her behavior because she's worried that I'm thinking yeah, which will happen plenty of times. Sometimes maybe she'll be on her phone and then I'll look over for a second and she'll get off her phone and I'll understand that she read my looking over there as somehow being like, hey, don't be on your phone, when I just happen to glance over there and then I think about whether I want to say anything or not. Oh, okay, so when she coughs is the rare example of the other side, the other end of that.
I feel so bad.
Don't feel so bad.
I
So it almost always, Rachel's always concerned about irritating me or something with no cause whatsoever, and reading my sort of neutral or maybe I don't necessarily have the most resting revelatory face either,
True.
My facial expression doesn't really necessarily tell you much about what I'm thinking about or something.
Only during media. Like watching media.
Oh yeah, when I'm watching media?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
you can tell what I'm
there's
feeling when I'm
something
watching
that
media.
Really got you? Yeah, but it's gotta really get you. Yeah.
I'm like a little kid,
Mm-hmm.
But when she's coughing like that, it's one of the rare instances where it's it's irritating, but it's like, I've already thought about it lots of times and come to the conclusion that the correct thing to do is to just, to not care, because it's so little. It's me giving so little. It's like.
Well, like, okay, so I feel like that's your 8, right? Like, I do. And I feel like it's my 7 or my 1. Maybe as 1, I'm trying to, like...
Well, you go outside when I'm working, usually.
Yes.
So it's like there's an undiscussed kind of compromise here, too. It's like Rachel makes a decision on a case-by-case basis about how irritating it's going to be for her to cough, you know? And if you had this pillow over there, which she doesn't right now, she'd probably put it over her face when she coughed.
Yes, because that was Winston's mom's suggestion.
My ISFJ friend changes her mood from mad to glad or vice versa if she sleeps for 2 hours. It's always like that. Why? I mean, sleep's huge for me, too. It has a huge impact on my mood. And,
Wow. That's fascinating.
So I don't know if you guys have heard of the Eurovision Song Contest, but it's something they have in Europe. Well, they have an American one now, and I submitted a song yesterday to it. I submitted Satchel Helpful Goods. I don't feel like it was the greatest rendition of it ever or anything, but I'm hopeful that the song stands on its own and garners some attention, but I certainly don't have my hopes up. I've tried to send things to like The Voice and stuff before and never gotten anything back, so but I like the fact that it's a song contest, a songwriting contest, not a Ja Ja Ding Dong song. I don't know what the Ja Ja Ding Dong song is. I am going to play the song I submitted to the contest right now, though. Every life lived reaches a time when the road splits in two. There's time, dark times, times of despair, times when it's hard to feel good. That's when I look for my sack full of solvency and that satchel of helpful goods. Satchel of helpful goods, satchel of helpful goods, satchel of helpful goods. Every life lived reaches an end when the road disappears. There are times where I'll be anybody else around. Or will I travel all alone? That's when I look for my sack full of solvency and that satchel filled up with home. Yeah, that satchel of nothing but bone. Satchel of helpful goods, satchel of helpful goods, satchel of helpful goods. satchel of helpful goods. Satchel of helpful goods. Satchel of helpful goods. Tonight. I mean, I wouldn't really. It's pretty hard to tell third from fourth. Some functions it's a little easier to tell than others. Like I think SI third looks rather different than SI fourth. They have different attitude towards conserving energy. They're introverts, and they're much more. I guess this plays in with the FE fourth too. I'm talking about specifically INTPs, but I guess INFPs with their SI third have an equivalent FI frame version of this, which is mistake avoidance. They're very much more mistake avoidant than SI fourth, which doesn't remember all the mistakes and suffer from them quite as much. So I don't know if that was ultimately the best song to send or not. I'm glad I did send it because it's a song that I'm sort of most settledly confident regarding its quality as a composition and its appeal as a composition. But I'm also really quite fond of my newest song, but of course I can never really trust my opinions about a new song until after I've lived with it for a while, I've lived with that song for a long time, and I still have a lot of faith in its quality as a composition. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on it in the past as well, which helps, So let's try this new song here. And I'd be interested in anybody who has an opinion about whether I should have gone with this song or the song I went with. I won't be disappointed with going with the song I went with regardless, but let me look at this thing. No, it's not. Here we go. It's a very cloudy day in Los Angeles, and today we run out of time. Struggles past, troubles still to come. The day is nearly done. Can someone buy us some more time? Cloudy day in Los Angeles, cloudy day in LA. I'm no sort of evangelist, but I've got something to say. 'Cause life can strangely be forgiving to those who stay awake all night. Mostly voices say to give in. They'll try to sap your will to fight. 'Cause whether I'm supposed to be here or just be soon forgotten noise is sort of based on what I see here, but also on what I avoid. Los Angeles. And today we run out of time. Struggles past, troubles still to come. The day is nearly done. Seems we bought us some more time. Cloudy day in Los Angeles. Cloudy day in LA. I'm no sort of evangelist, but I've got something to say. 'Cause life can strangely be forgiving for those who stay awake all night. Voices mostly say to give in. They'll try to sap your will to fight. Don't let them sap your will to fight. It's a very cloudy day in Los Angeles. Maybe end like that.
I like it.
Thanks.
Eucalyptus Claw says the first song was more NI resonating. Good choice.
Cool. Maybe I should have played Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze. Oh, well, he's Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, the friendliest guy that you will see. Yes, he wants to be your friend, but he comes from around the bend, and it will be a while till he sees you again. He's Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, he's a friend to you and me. He's International Delight's favorite go-to right-hand guy. He's international like him, but he is also busy like his friend, the beaver bee. Busiest creature, busy as a bee, busy as a beaver, and so much busier than Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze. Well, he's Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, shabba-doo-ba-da-ba-ba-doo-da. Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, shabba-doo-ba-day. Yes, he's Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, shabba-doo-ba-da-ba-ba-doo-da. Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, shabba-doo-ba-day. And if you go to visit him for starts, remember to bring something sour or tart. He's not a fan of sugary treats because he's Pucker Tart and not Pucker Sweet. Well, he's Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, the friendliest guy that you will see. Yes, he wants to be your friend, but he comes from around the bend, so it will be a while till he sees you again. Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, he's a friend to you and me. He's International Delight's favorite go-to right-hand guy. He's international like him, and he is also busy like his friend, the beaver bee. Busiest creature, busy as a bee and busy as a beaver, and so much busier than Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze. Well, he's Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, shabba-doo-ba-da-ba-ba-doo-da. Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, shabba-doo-ba-day. Yes, he's Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, shabba-doo-ba-da-ba-ba-doo-da. Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze, shabba-doo-ba-day. And if you go to visit him for starts, remember to bring something sour or tart. He's not a fan of sugary treats because he's Pucker Tart and not Pucker Sweet. Yes, he's Pucker Tart Lemon Squeeze. Thanks, darling. That's a pretty good song. Reminds me of the days of yesteryear, when everyone knew how everything was all the time. Those were happier times, easier times, times that never existed. Too much noise in the data stream, loud enough to disrupt everybody's dreams. Frustrations mean mistakes are made, until it seems everybody's just throwing shade. I won't be another casualty of other people's well-intentioned rules. I used to think that some tomorrow there'd be time for yesterday. It's not the sort of thing that one can borrow, no one willing still to lend a day. Your uncertainty's implicit, just like an unexpected visit from a bunch of men all dressed in blue suits. I won't be another casualty of other people's well-intentioned rules. I used to think that some tomorrow there'd be time for yesterday. That was pretty good.
Yeah, you said it great.
Thanks, Darlene.
You're welcome.
Sammy has a story that need be told, and this is a song for an open road, 'cause such a thing must always do its job. She married up Jeb, turned 19, 4 years and 3 kids weaned, weary now and questioning the path. Agency out, face discretion, looking in our courses, way too young. The urgency conferred is really just oppression, making sure those underneath them always run. Doug at 20 thought bourbon fun, and likewise Doug at 21, and so forth well up into middle age. What once had seemed to set him free became his whole identity. Now Doug's about another drunken rage. Agency out, face its discretion, locking in our courses, way too young. The urgency conferred is really just oppression. They'll offer you incentives, but they haven't got a thing that's fun. Everybody's panicked about the kids. Lock 'em up with extra dexedrine. Mathematics to impose success, or produce more unjust duress. Agency outpaces discretion, locking in our courses, way too young. The urgency conferred is really just oppression, making sure those underneath them always run. Without consent, it's really just oppression, by parasites surviving on their wages earned by lying, while they feed their fear of dying. Yeah, they feed upon the futures of the young. A little too fast. Couldn't keep up in the choruses. A little too fast. "30,000 days, too many expectations, not even worth a damn. 30,000 nights to sleep off the intoxication, otherwise you won't escape the plan. I've wasted half my days trying another's ways. Who can tell me my priorities? Is there anybody knows the key? 'Cause I'm tired of doing it wrong. Wrong direction and have all along. Wait until I know. Or is that just hesitation? Clarity's no good once your chance is gone. What I need to show is it's so below my station. I'm tired of doing it wrong. I've wasted half my days trying on others' ways. Who can tell me my priorities? Is there anybody knows the key? 'Cause I'm tired of doing it wrong. Want direction and how all along. I think I'm doing this wrong. Yes, I think I'm doing this wrong. 'Cause I think I'm doing it wrong. Doing it wrong. Thank you, darling. Thank you for your wonderful responsiveness. Gerald has a thought. Gerald has a lot. Gerald has a plot to get the margarine tater tots. He's got a good idea for a name-changing business. Thinking now about what he'll call Christmas when they hire his firm to change that name. Gerald always thought there'd be chance enough to return to the work left rough. He'd get back to it eventually, but his visions piled up and his plans would interrupt all the work that started off so hopefully. And now his mind is back on his business, thinking of changing factless to listless, so how all the people will shout his name. And Gerald knows he understands ever more clearly now. He won't provide explanation regarding the why or the how. He'll see you and know you from inside your heart. Exciting, delighting, Gerald plays his part. But Gerald still knew there's too much to do, and he drops time in the underview. Too much to rebut, so where now and what? Too much time spent picking the skew with you. Gerald has a thought. Gerald has a lot. Gerald has a plot to get the margarine's tasty spots. He's got a good idea for a name-changing business. Thinking now about what he'll call Christmas when they hire his firm to change that name. Gerald has a thought. Well, that was well executed. It's about as well as I ever played that song, really. If Jesus was people but absent of sin, he must then have struggled with regular men and women, of course. When they too were present, disciples all warily eyeing the lesson. If people were Jesus, they'd know as they think, and everyone's thoughts would be true. And feelings once spoken would sit where they sink, and we'd all know just what to do. People aren't Jesus once they're betrayed. The easy believing forever is lost. Maybe naivete is not to be saved, but the wise pay a terrible cost. Does virtue require a rational take, or is virtue that's reasoned invariably fake? Losing itself just distract from the flow, or very deliberate and slow. People aren't Jesus once they're betrayed. The easy believing forever is lost. Maybe naivete is not to be saved, but the wise pay a terrible cost. The ones you thought you knew acts like you never have met. The life you made for two has faded into regret. There's no one unshaken, we all have been shook, but being forsaken don't mean you're forsook. And though in the past we've been hung out to dry, we'll find them at last if we're willing to try. People aren't Jesus once they're betrayed. The easy believing forever is lost. Maybe naivete is not to be saved, but the wise pay a terrible cost. Yeah, baby, naivete is not to be saved, but the wise pay a terrible cost. What's the matter with Chad? Is he terribly bad? Is he very like Dan, who's a terrible man? Is he sort of like Jill, who can't pay her bill? Or rather like Jack, just stuck on the facts? What's the matter with Drew? Will you know what to do if they bring attitude? Will she show ingenuity? She talks about you whenever we go walking. What's the matter with Jen? It's terribly bad. Living with Jen, looking terribly thin. What's the deal with Frank? Peeling fish from my tank. He's colluding with you and they're talking to Lou. What's wrong with the ladies? What's the matter with men? From the feelings of Katie to the coldness of Sven. They talk about you whenever we go walking. Paths that lead to lesser days still spell out the overwatered past. And whoever's left that's still okay, just tie the sails to the mast. Are you angry at Ken or at Neville again? Don't bother with Kev, he's practically dead. Just focus on Bert, he's medium hurt. What's the quantity for Liz? Did she fail a quiz? What's the deal with Drew? Will she know what to do if they bring attitude? Will she show ingenuity? And she talks about you whenever we go walking. Paths that lead to lesser days still out the overwatered past. And whoever's left that's still okay, just tie the sails to the mast. 'Cause each of us has much engravely sinned. Throw up the hands, stiffen the chin. Catastrophe looms heavy overhead again. Time's gone will never be again. Where in the world do all these flies come from? I've had flies chasing me till the end of time. Hi everybody who's still here, thank you for sticking around. Those of you who did, I appreciate it.
Switch says hello.
Hi Switch. Are you a light switch? What kind of switch is there? A horse switch?
You know about that old wives' tale I told you, right? With flies. They say it's you've been gossiping if flies are around you.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I've been gossiping. I don't feel like I've been gossiping.
No, you're not a gossiper. It says for both of us in our birth charts that we're gossipers, but I don't think that we do.
I don't think so. I mean, I talk a lot, but that doesn't mean we're gossiping.
No, you're not like, oh my god.
Flies represent demonic energies. I think that they represent mostly, partially at least, the dead possums under the patio. There's a couple of dead possums under the patio.
This
They've been there
one?
for that one. They've been there for a while, but it still seems like there's more flies over there than.
Yeah, I think Delilah's right. It's because of the dead possum. But they say, you told me that it's like best just to leave it disintegrate under there.
Yeah, that's what my dad said.
Yeah. He would know best.
He knows what he wants to have happen underneath his deck, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Dave Strauss knows what he wants with his stuff. Gossip is benign, slander is malicious. I haven't really been doing much of either. I've been kind of laying fallow, feeling frustrated, feeling kind of demoralized maybe a little bit about YouTube. But I'm, feeling better now, and tomorrow I get my script filled, so.
If I gossip, it's celebrity gossip. Like, I'll talk about Bennifer being back.
If I gossip, it's usually about the budding bromance between Alan Bryan and Horse Mumbler. And how Switch is getting jealous while Borderline S is trying to have a romantic foursome.
Wow, this is so much energy.
There's a lot of gossip in that one.
Yeah.
Borderline S, you are adventurous. Because let me tell you, Horse Mumbler's packing a horse's worth of man meat in there. 24 inches and 6 inches in circumference. It's an amazing piece of work. Yeah. 2 feet long and half a feet thick. It's like a 2x4. Are you ready for that, Borderline S? Are you ready to take Horse Mumbler's 2x4 up the butt? Oh, Jowd no Fala says glad. He's glad to take Horse Mumbler's 2x4 up the butt. I'm glad you're glad. I'm glad you're not sad or mad, but instead glad. I think that's rad. Bojack's mother is a lot like your mother.
Yeah. Not like entirely. But, yeah.
Rachel and I visited my mother yesterday. We brought her McDonald's and watched the Olympics with my mother at the nursing home. And that was nice. Mm-hmm. And I've been enjoying the Olympics. I enjoyed both the men's and women's cycling road race, which I got caught up in and kept me up way too late at night. I mean, I have trouble going to sleep at a regular hour anyway, I guess, but I try to regulate my sleep zone. It just doesn't seem to work very well. Are you really not a monkey? That immediately makes me doubt your status. It makes me think maybe you are a monkey. If you hadn't said, I'm not a monkey coming right in, I would have assumed you were human. But now I'm doubting. Now I'm curious. She's got Joan Crawford vibes, but Betty Davis eyes. Betty Davis eyes. Well, gossip apparently Kimberly was telling about me after we broke up was that I had impregnated Rachel and knocked her up.
That's bananas.
I want to let the world know that is not true.
It is not true.
I did not knock up Rachel.
You were worried that I had come over and been pregnant and not told you. But sure enough, I got my period. Because I don't like lying.
You're not a liar, Rachel. You are no liar. I was watching that stream when you defined TI as accurately as possible. I don't remember which stream that was. TI, depending on how you frame it, could be expressed as parsing words, what could be described as a disinterested calculus.
Hmm.
Or parsing symbols that contain exclusivity. Not just words, I guess. I'm very word heavy. Well, I'm feeling like it's about time to wrap it up. Any last questions, thoughts, comments, complaints, queries, concerns, quandaries?
How's your bagel?
It was better than nothing.
That's great.
Yeah. No last any of those things. I wonder why Not a Monkey's message got deleted by the Google moderator team. Didn't he just say hi?
Yeah. That's weird.
Right, it is weird. Okay, well, I guess that's it then. Thanks for being here, everybody. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. I'll be back again soon. I get my script filled tomorrow, so you know what that means. I mean, more Eric than you know what to do with.